Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our electronic committee of the whole meeting on June 15th, 2021. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distancing, but I am in the chamber. The main purpose of this meeting is to receive information. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement that the land on which we gather today virtually is a traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. And what I have learned from walking along with the Indigenous people is that our relationship with the land should be one of stewardship rather than ownership. And I'm honored to take this journey with them. The purpose of this meeting is contextual information and to seek direction from Council to support the development of the Region of Waterloo's 2022 annual business plan and budget. I will now ask Stevie Nadalachny to do the roll call.
Thank you. We have regrets from Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Kiefer.
Present.
Councillor Lawrence. I can see you. I know you're here. Catherine McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Here.
Chair Redmond.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
We have everyone present, Madam Chair, with the exception of Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Stevie. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor Jowett.
Madam Chair, I don't have a conflict of interest, but I wasn't called on roll call today. I'm sure it was unintentional. However, I just want to say for the record, present.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. We're delighted that you are here. You are value added as always. So thank you for that. I see no declarations of pecuniary interest. We now have a presentation. The first item up on our agenda is building a world-class community. And I will turn the floor over to Rod Regier, our Commissioner of Planning, Development, and Legislative Services. Over to you, Rod.
I think Connie is going to actually introduce the presentation as a whole.
Yes, thank you, Rod, and through the chair. Thank you very much for joining us today as we go through our 2022 plan and budget workshop. We have a number of exciting topics to discuss today, set up into three distinct portions. However, the presentation will flow and we'll be all participating as we go through. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, what it means to be a world-class community. And there was a discussion paper that was provided as context for this to really help open our minds to take a look at globally what's happening, globally what communities are looking at as they aim to be world-class and meeting the needs of their citizens. And then we're going to talk a bit more about what that means in the Region of Waterloo's context. We'll talk about our strategic plan and our annual business planning process, and then we'll move into some more specific financial context with Mr. Dyer's presentation. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Mr. Regier to talk a little bit more about the discussion paper in the context of building a world-class community.
Thank you very much, Connie. Yes, Council has articulated a strong desire to assert a leadership position globally for regional governance, and this is completely in line with the aspirations of our community as a whole. Our academic institutions have long performed above their weight class in terms of the research that they do, the students that they facilitate development of. Our business community as a whole has competed in the global marketplace for decades. We see companies like Toyota Manufacturing, for example, with the most competitive automotive manufacturing facility in North America here in Waterloo Region. We've seen many companies actually defining the standards, the global standards for their industries, and of course the benchmark for smartphone at one time was BlackBerry, of course. Connie, can you change the slide? Or the concept of world class and the aspiration to achieve world class standards in economic development has been really at the foundation of our economic development strategies over the years. You can recall, for example, the conversation that the Chambers of Commerce and Communitech and CTT had back in the early 2000s regarding development of a cultural community to support the attraction of talented individuals to the region. This was founded on the concept that a world-class urban region was one that was able to attract the best talent internationally, that we became a magnet for capable people from around the world. And, you could see investments that we made in the cultural community, that we made in the startup ecosystems that have really done well in the Waterloo region. The strategy to build a more compact urban region, investment decisions by the region to build the ION LRT, Kitchener's decision to implement the Economic Development Investment Fund, efforts to build the research park at the University of Waterloo. All of these initiatives were designed to support the concept of world class that was articulated by Richard Florida in 2002. And we are actually seeing the benefits of that in a very significant way. We're seeing significant growth in the technology industries over the last little while. We've seen fantastic amounts of investment in high density residential and office in the region, and so on. Connie, can you change the slide? But there have been some knock-on consequences for this model, and I think even Richard Florida back in 2017, after the financial crisis of 2009, 2008, 2009, came to recognize that a winner-take-all model for development, where we only focused on the most capable individuals worldwide, where we only focused on the development of high-tech industries, was really not a sustainable model in the fullness of time. It leads to increasing levels of inequity in society, that it generates challenges in terms of the housing market, and there are significant knock-on effects for people who are not able to participate in a high-tech economy. So over the last little while, people have started thinking more clearly about an inclusive model of world-class communities. This slide illustrates some of the elements that are included in a more holistic vision of what a world-class community might look like, and it addresses things like livable neighborhoods, ecological responsibility, affordable housing, and so on and so forth. It is still founded on many of the principles that and partnerships that we put in place in the early 2000s, and so we've got a great foundation to build on. Connie? Interestingly, this holistic model of a world-class city, actually a world-class community and region, actually lines up really well with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You can see in this presentation, in this slide here, that building an inclusive urban region actually hits a whole bunch of these goals. The first set of goals relating to poverty and hunger and health and well-being. Goals with regard to decent work and economic development. Goal number 11 actually addresses sustainable cities and communities with a whole raft of recommendations. But you can see down, in the last row that climate action, the healthcare, the health of our water resources and our ecosystems, and building a just community with strong institutions. These are all things that are deeply embedded in who we are and what we aspire to become as a region. And more importantly, we have already identified many of these goals as foundational for our strategic plan as the Region of Waterloo. Our commitment to building a sustainable economy, our vision for building healthy, safe, and inclusive communities, sustainable transportation. We're having a very significant conversation right now about climate action and environmental sustainability. And of course, we're thinking progressively about engaging our human resources, the public services, the people that provide service to the community in innovative ways, and in ways that can help us move towards becoming a world-class region on all of these measures, whether they are economic, labor force measures, or social measures and environmental measures. So I think the message from my perspective is that our strategic plan actually does line up really well on the vision for a world-class region. If we commit to those principles, to that plan, and see it cascading through the decisions that we make, that we will definitely move the dial towards an important role, a leadership position in the global community of regions. Over to you, Connie.
Thank you, Rod. We'll now move into a bit of a discussion around annual business plan development. And so from a staff perspective this year, to very simply look at our responsibilities, we look at maintaining and achieving a world-class community. We have two things we need to do this year. One is to implement the plan focused in the 6 priority areas that Council has given us as direction in building a world-class community. And the second is planning for the future into the 2020s and beyond. So as we're implementing things and making changes to support our community today, we're also thinking about all of the context that Rod has spoken about in terms of how to continue to build a world-class community into the future. And both of those jobs really require a lot of clarity and alignment within the organization in terms of strategy and execution. And so at the Region of Waterloo, we're moving to a strategy framework that starts, at the top with the strategic plan, which is really Council's mandate for staff to support the community, and then moving to an annual business planning model. And that annual business plan each year is really our operational plan for how we're delivering on the strat plan. And so in the coming months, we'll be bringing a report for council on how we're doing in 2021 in achieving our 2021 annual business plan with the goal of achieving our strategic plan. We then have cascading. And so when we look at the strat plan, when we look at what we need to do this year, we then have divisional and department plans through commissioner PDPs. And that's really how each department, division, commissioner is responsible for delivering on that plan, which delivers on council's vision for the community. And all the way down to individual PDPs, which really outline each person's individual contribution to achieving that strategy. So as we look to build our 2022 annual business plan, we're starting with the priorities. So we're starting with looking at what is it that we have set out to achieve for our community? How far have we come this year and in previous years? And what is it that we really need to focus on in the coming year to get there? And so when we think about building the budget for 2022, the first conversation that we've been having at the staff level is around how do we start to reimagine the way that we deliver services to build the community into the future. So starting with our priorities, building our timeline, looking at the resources that we need, and then looking at our budget in terms of how we're going to fund the priorities to better support the community. I think if I'm not going to play the video, but I don't want anyone to cry today. I don't know about you, but every time I view this video, I cry. But I think it really paints a compelling picture of the vision that council has set for our community. When we think about supporting every single resident, when we think about all of the different services that the region provides, when we think about all of the great things that our community is building on so far. Coming into the region, I don't know how much longer I can say I'm new, but I'm going to hold on to that a little bit longer. But I have to tell you, coming into a chief strategy role at the region with a strategic plan that so much was built on listening to the community, understanding what the community's needs were, and building some clarity around what the vision of the future is, it's a real gift. And I didn't have the benefit of being involved in some of the strategy workshops that council did last year in building the budget for 2021. And so when I joined the region in December, I really had to spend some time thinking about, what is a world-class community and what is that vision and what does that look like? And the more and more that I learned about, what global best practice, what leading practices, what a world-class community looks like, I came to this very astute conclusion. And that's that this is what world-class looks like. It looks like Waterloo Region. It looks like all of the many components that we've built together over the years. I wasn't a regional employee, but I've certainly been a member of this community for a long time and have benefited from all of the work that's gone into building the community that we all enjoy today. And when I think about what it took to get to this place where we are today, it was a lot of work, different decisions, difficult choices, lots of priorities to build all of these different components of the Waterloo region that residents have today. And so as we're building our plan for next year, staff are really taking a look at, what is it that we do today that is world-class? And what is it going to take, the choices, the decisions, the priorities, the initiatives, the programs, this year and next year and the year after to continue to build that world-class community. We know that what looks like world-class to support our residents today isn't what it's going to be in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. And so if we're going to continue to be ahead of the curve as a community and as a region, we need to be thinking about, all of those steps and things that we need to do this year and next. So over the next few minutes, we're actually going to have a number of staff come and share what they feel is class at the region today and what they feel we need to look at into the future to continue building a world-class community for residents. And so I'm going to turn it over first to our Director of Community Planning and Chief Planner, Michelle Sergi, to talk about world-class community planning.
Thanks, Connie. So wanted to start today by talking about some of the long-standing traditions and great planning that's been done here in Waterloo Region. In terms of world-class communities, we have existing policies and frameworks that are definitely world-class and provide an amazing foundation for us to continue to move forward into the future as we continue to strive to achieve what is world-class. So in terms of what's in our plan today, we have incredibly strong agricultural protection policies that protect not just the land, but provide stability for our agricultural industries and ultimately food security for our region. When we look to environmental protection, we protect all of our natural areas in our systems, as well as we make decisions, land use decisions, growth decisions, natural heritage protection decisions based on watershed planning for a world-class model. Also, we have water resources planning. When our water resources policies were put in place at the time, they were innovative and groundbreaking and continue to be incredibly strong, protecting the region's drinking water sources. So we have wellhead protection areas. In addition to that, we put in place the protected countryside, the countryside line, and regional recharge areas, again, to maintain that protection over time. We also have spent a lot of time dedicated to managing our growth in a sustainable way. We have ION stage 1, we have higher intensification rates, we've looked to community building and remediation of brownfields. So again, we have some real strength there in the existing plan, and we want to continue to build on that and move forward as we review our regional official plan. The next slide, please. So the official plan is a foundational document. And by that, I mean that a lot of the objectives that you find in the strategic plan are sort of addressed to a certain extent, not completely, but in part through the regional official plan. It really sets sort of that groundwork that can help facilitate a lot of movement on some of these objectives. So one of the things that we do want to achieve from a world-class community is we want a vibrant, complete, well-designed community with iconic places and spaces. And traditionally, region, we think of that region-wide, but I think we need to start thinking about it more at a local level and a neighborhood level. Certainly these spaces and places have become highlighted in terms of their importance during COVID as we walk around our neighborhoods, and try to make those connections. We also want to have an inclusive and an equitable community. We know that there's been gentrification. We know that there are neighborhoods at risk. How do we help all to be part of our community and active and successful in that community? From a climate action perspective, it's absolutely really fortunate that we have an objective of 80 by 50 at the same time that we're planning to grow to 2051. It really provides that opportunity to move the benchmark because we know that there has to be some fundamental shifts with respect to how we live and where we grow and how we move around our community if we're actually going to achieve our goals related to climate action. It also links with sustainable, It also links very closely with sustainable transportation. Our ability to deliberately and plan to shift people from auto dependency and single auto vehicles will really link in with sort of where and how we grow in that climate action perspective. It will set the stage for stage 2 ION, EVs, micromobility, providing densities that are supportive transit, both sort of at the neighborhood level as well as in the built up areas. We want to provide attainable housing for all. So providing that range of housing, affordable housing targets, inclusionary zoning, and everything that we can do from a planning perspective to help to move the marker on what is a very complex issue. And from a thriving economy perspective, we really want to be that Western anchor of the Toronto to Waterloo technology corridor. Continue to create that diverse economy and realize our vision for the East Side lands in the airport, as well as providing for all day two-way go and other connections to the community. I'm going to pass it on now to Connie Lacey, our Director of Senior Services.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Connie, for switching the slides. And good morning, Council. I was asked to talk about how community services, and in particular senior services, is supporting the vision of the Region of Waterloo to be a world-class community. And I'm sure that many members of Council can recall a year and a half that we had our butterfly launch here at Sunnyside. And it was a wonderful event. Many of you attended. We were very grateful for it. And we were very excited because we were moving forward with a really forward-thinking model of person-centered care in the region. And certainly that initiative was strongly supporting a vibrant and well-designed and inclusive community. Then, of course, COVID hit. And as a result of it, we became all pandemic response all the time. That has been our situation for well over a year now. But things are starting to look up. And now that vaccines have taken hold in our region, and that's had a great impact on the outbreaks that we've seen in long-term care. As you know, long-term care was hit very hard, but we are certainly seeing things looking a lot better. And as a result, we're able to get back into our focus on the butterfly approach to Sunnyside Home and how we can move forward to become a certified butterfly model. Connie, can you change to the next slide, please? Thanks. So just to give a framework to this. So how does the butterfly approach support world-class community planning in the region? And as some of you may recall, we did a lot of research prior to this to look for the best approach for person-centered care. And as a result, we came across the butterfly approach, which we felt was a sector-leading person-centered model of care. It demonstrated really positive outcomes, social, emotional, and physical, for long-term care residents. And as many of you may remember, it was first piloted in the region of Peel several years ago. And they partnered with a company called Meaningful Care Matters. It used to be Dementia Care Matters, but they did revise their name. And they had a great deal of success in achieving some wonderful outcomes for their residents that live particularly in their dementia care home areas. And as a result, Peel is spreading that model throughout all of their homes in Peel region. Following that, we really started to look at how this model would work for Sunnyside, and we engaged with Meaningful Care Matters to start on that certification. And we're really pleased to be back on track again. Certainly the certification looks different now. We have to do it virtually. We have the trainers coming in, but we're starting to see some great momentum building again. And this is really exciting for us, because what this does is it creates a model in the region that is going to be a go-to model. And one of the things that we learned recently from the Long-Term Care Commission's that report released was that they pay a great deal of attention to the importance of person-centered care models for long-term care, and that this was really going to be a game changer. And Butterfly was highlighted along with a few other methods such as Greenhouse or Eden as a leading approach that would really change the landscape for long-term care and make a much better experience for those people who experience long-term care. So because we have started on this certification already, we will be well ahead of the game in achieving that certification, hopefully in 2022. We do have a goal of early summer of 2022 to achieve our certification. And what we see is that this will make Sunnyside a go-to model that other long-term care sectors, other municipalities can come and view as they did in Peel. And we also hope that because of that, those practices will spread out. So we provide adult day programs and community programs across the region. And certainly the concept of Butterfly doesn't just apply to Sunnyside Home, it applies to all the care programs that we deliver. And again, we can be a model for others. We hope too that we are going to generate the same kinds of positive outcomes for our residents. And we're very confident that we will. And so we really feel that we're ahead of the game, and this will make us the first home certified in the butterfly approach in the region of Waterloo and among the first in the province. I think one of the other things I just wanted to mention is that we have been able to pay for this thus far with funds that have been generated from the Sunnyside Foundation. And again, the fact that we have the Sunnyside Foundation at all is really a leading practice as well. Not many municipalities do have foundations that support the work of long-term care, but some do. But we're certainly leading in that area. And because we do have that foundation, we are able to provide for a lot of those initiatives without taking it. The funding is not available from the ministry as of yet. And this allows us to not have to lean on the levy to do this certification. So we're very excited about this. And certainly I feel very strongly, and I think many others do too, that this is we're well on our way to having a sector leading model in long-term care. Thank you. And I'll pass it back over to Connie.
Thanks, Connie. I think what's great about the two presentations we've had so far. You know, Michelle really talked about world-class at a macro level, and I think Connie has really demonstrated what world-class looks like at a program level. And both are incredibly important as we look at building a world-class community for residents. I'm now going to turn it over to our Director of Transit Services to talk about world-class transit.
Thank you, Connie. Morning, Council. Council be well the seismic changes that have happened to transit over the last 10 years, and some of the initiatives are certainly world class, and especially for a community of our size. I can point to, obviously our light rail and ion system, operating in the Central Transit Corridor, carrying almost 20,000 riders per day in the immediate months after opening, which is a tremendous start. And the foresight to connect future stage 2 in the terms of bus rapid transit and the ion bus connection to Cambridge, higher order bus services with queue jump lanes, bus priorities, enhanced shelters, distinctive vehicles, and attractive features like high back seats and free Wi-Fi. Those are all leading edge initiatives. In addition to that, Council supported 6 iExpress services and high frequency, on a grid network operating on major corridors to provide faster service. What customers want, faster service and more of it. We expanded services into new growth areas and Iron Needles here in Village, Maple Grove Corridor as just a few examples. And, at the same time added, periphery bus stations and terminals to connect routes, the Boardwalk, Cambridge Centre, Sunrise Centre, UW, Conestoga College. It's a long list, and they're impressive facilities on their own. They're attractive, they're comfortable, they're safe. And at the same time, those are transit initiatives. We've integrated, active transportation closely into the transit network so that people can get around on those services together with, bike shelters, bike racks at many iExpress stops. All the stations have it. Covered bike facilities at Cambridge Centre, as you can see in the photo. And we have bike racks on all buses. So that's really, thinking ahead in the sense that, people can take their bike and get from one end of their journey to the other on bike and transit. So those initiatives are certainly leading edge, especially on the scale we're doing it across the whole system. We've also implemented an easy-go fare system and an affordable transit program, one of the first in Canada. So for a system our size, these are tremendous for our customers to be able to pay on our network as simply as possible, as quickly as possible. Other technology, which isn't quite as obvious to everyone, we have real-time bus information. So customers very much appreciate being able to know where, when, down to the minute that their bus is coming. We have passenger displays, app integration, electronic fare management. You can load your card from home. And world-class, last but not least, I would point to GRT's staff of dedicated employees. Without them, we couldn't provide the services that we do, and that includes our contracted staff. So, those are some of the world-class things that we feel that GRT does. Next slide, please. And in terms of, the future and where we need to go, we need to, continue what we're doing. It's fabulous where we've been, but as I mentioned before, more direct, frequent service is what people want. They want to be able to get around as easy as possible. We need to compete with the single occupancy vehicle mode. It's the dominant mode of transportation. It takes up the most space. It's least environmentally friendly. So we need to compete directly with that. And you heard Michelle talk about a fundamental movement or change. We've done a tremendous amount of work expanding choice in transit and active transportation to provide choice for people. The next step is to basically compete against those modes by giving advantage to transit, by giving advantages to active transportation, and micromobility initiatives. So by giving those advantages to those modes, you're attracting more people to use that mode. Few other things I can think of are improving first mile and last mile by on-demand transit, active transportation, micromobility. So, similar to what we do with bike racks at stops and on buses, being able to integrate into those modes is important. Strong parking and land use policies need to continue. Parking policy is the one that, can directly support transit and active modes. And we need to continue to invest in the world-class, infrastructure that we've put in place already. Two comes to mind: King Victoria Transit Hub, transit stations, two-way all day, GO service, and vehicle electrification for buses is another initiative which we need to continue to do on a large scale. So those are a few things that I can think of for the future for transit services and active transportation. Over to you, Connie.
Great, thank you, Peter. A great overview of where we've come and how much is still ahead. Next, I'll invite Grayson Bass, who is the lab manager for the Smart Waterloo Region Innovation Lab, to talk a little bit about what we're doing today from an innovation lens and what the future looks like. Grayson?
Thank you, Connie. I think I want to start sharing if we can remove the other presentation, but I'm happy to start talking about what we're doing at the Smart Waterloo Region Innovation Lab. So today, we've relaunched the Smart Waterloo Region project, and we look at that again as a 20-year initiative so that we can actually go forward and build the city, the best city of the 22nd century, not just the 21st. So right now, the Innovation Lab is our first tactical piece that we've started and is our platform for change. And we look at that as the platform to create partnerships in government, within the region and around the world, to run pilots that help us learn and do better so we can expand the world-class service we're offering today, and to then implement projects that can scale across the region. Some of the activity that we're starting today is that we're benchmarking against world-class cities. We are partnering and twinning with world-class cities, and we're leading Future of Cities initiatives here with Communitech. And we're also building and delivering 21st century skills training programs for children and youth, which the mandate, if everyone will recall, that the Smart Waterloo region is to build the best community for children and youth. And I think that's important when we think about the future, because the children, of course, will outlive all of us if we're doing everything right. Can we see the next slide, please? I'd like to just remind Council that part of the original Smart Waterloo region proposal was to provide access and connect fiber via the libraries to our rural communities. That's still a very important initiative to me, and something that I am very keen to continue in exploring and making that a success over the next few years. I actually think that what I've heard has been very exciting and puts us on a great path towards building a world-class city that is sustainable and resilient, given the challenges that we'll face in the future. And from our perspective, we want to make everything we do sustainable, not just in the sense, and regenerative, not in the sense of economic and climate, but also in the sense that it is inspiring for everyone. We are implementing a policy that by the end of the next 5 years, we want to be self-sustaining as a government entity, so we don't rely on taxpayers. And we're doing that through creating our own IP and generating revenue through the innovation activities. And I'd like to say that we will call on your support as we have interest from foreign communities actually funding some of our lab as well. And just to end up real quick, I put on this slide 3 things of the challenges that are going to shape this century. We're going to have challenges around climate and food, around equality of opportunity, and what that's going to look like as it affects culturally, how we integrate. And I think that these challenges are something that the region can meet in a unique way compared to other cities and municipalities around the world. I took this role. I'm also new. I don't know if I'm going to be like Connie and say I'm going to be new for a while, but to say that the region is a municipal superpower. We have advantages that no other community in the world has. And I hope that we are wise enough to leverage that and collectively work on that, both as regional government and as citizens, to create a better future for our children and youth. Because if we don't put that at the center of what we do, we have certainly failed our calling for the future. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you, Grace. And I think I'm going to coin that and maybe get some shirts made with municipal superpower.
That's a great
it might
idea.
help us in some of the more challenging days. Thanks, Grayson. Last and definitely not least, I'd like to invite Terry Yancey, our Director of IT, to talk about world-class IT services today and into the future.
Thank you very much, Connie. Good morning, Council. I'm happy to be here today, and I'm happy to be here as an example of one of many support services, I'll say, within the region. I know IT has become pervasive in what we do, and I've outlined on this slide a couple of the things, obviously, that we're doing every day, and we'll continue to do at class level, but some of the things we need to do for the future. You'll probably never see me speak, Council, without bringing up security first. Security is what we do, obviously, 24/7, because it's core to what the service we deliver. And without it, everything else becomes a bigger challenge. So we'll always be working to improve our security posture in the region. And that remains to secure the applications and the data that we use. And that those applications and data need to be very much open and accessible and available, right? And the key to that is not just to the employees of the region. You've heard others in the presentation already. Peter talked a lot about the technology in transit. We want to make sure all employees have access to that data and those applications to do their job and to deliver their service. But equally as important, what we provide to the residents to make sure that it is easily accessible, open, and available to them 24/7 to access regional services virtually, if that's an option that's better for them, or in person in our facilities. And so we're putting a lot of effort into our data quality in the region, especially from an IT perspective, as we're looking to share data sets and bridge those data sets from division to division. There's a lot of effort going into making sure we have well-managed, high-quality data. And that data then is going to be leveraged in the future as we look for new and innovative ways to deliver those services. So we've already taken advantage of the significant investments through the Audit and Accountability Fund 2 and the Strategic Investment in Technology, looking at opportunities for AI, looking at opportunities for innovation and how we can improve that service delivery. And I think that'll be one of the major focuses going forward as we transform services. What's our role as IT to support those transformations, be it in planning, be it at Sunnyside, in transit, or in the types of transformations that Grayson talked about in smart cities and children and youth. And then have that data available to all of us to make the important decisions to invest in the right places and move forward. And the final point I'd like to make is around Mr. Regier mentioned attracting the right talent. Living in the region, we have a unique opportunity not just to attract technical talent to region IT, world-class talent to move us forward, but to make sure we create the opportunities to work with world-class talent and the world-class organizations that are here and work together to deliver those services. So just like Grayson talked about managing those partnerships, it's going to be very important for the Region of Waterloo moving forward. We're excited to be part of it. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you, Terry, and thanks for representing many of the support services that are working behind the scenes to enable service delivery for residents. You can't build a world-class community and a world-class organization without world-class supports. And so that concludes the beginning portion of our presentation. I want to thank the leaders who stepped up today to present. You can't build world-class without world-class leadership. And it really is the directors and managers that are driving this planning and the strategy and the success of this. And so thank you to those. I think it also demonstrates the complexity of the planning and service delivery that we're looking at. So that was a very small snippet of areas that are looking at world-class today and world-class into the future. When you look at the complexity and the depth and breadth of the region, we're really looking at everything from early learning to end of life. And everything in between to build an exceptional quality of life for those that live here, which is a big responsibility, an exciting responsibility, and requires a lot of integrated planning and work to build. So I might pause there before we move into the next portion of today, which is really around, there's all these things we need to do to build a world-class community. How do we build a budget to support that? And might give it back to you, Chair, for any questions for any of the presenters and any of the content that we've covered so far this morning.
Thank you so much, Connie. And I just have to say it's outstanding presentation. I'm certainly energized. And my only criticism was we should have seen the video. We did that in-house, and that video is just a gold standard, I think, in representing us. But very, very exciting to know what's going on and what's planned. Councillor Jowett, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Redmond, and I'd like to echo the sentiments of exciting, but just a couple of quick points. I know that most of us are familiar with the Prosperity Forum, Barn Raisers, and some of the other leadership groups who tackled some of the difficult issues. And there was no shortage of data or narrative, but we really didn't do so great with execution. So I'm hopeful, Connie, for the group's presentation today, and certainly your strategic direction in this. Talent attraction was fairly significant. It was one of the reasons I spent so many years on CTT, because I knew how important it was to a prosperous community. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some of this narrative turn into execution, because I do think that we were a bit stalled on that, and I'm glad to see that there's hope there and we're moving forward. I too am really glad to see the high level here, and we didn't get caught into a gazillion presentation slides. I'm a little bit taken aside by missing out on the airport. That capital asset is critical to our economic development going forward. And so I would have maybe liked to have even just had a sentence on the fact that we're moving forward on that, and it's a historic time for that asset. So that's the only thing I would have maybe suggested. But other than that, I'm really excited too. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. I don't know, Connie, do you want to respond, or Rod, or we'll just take it under advisement? Rod?
Well, yes, certainly. I would totally agree with Councillor Jowett that the airport is a very significant asset for the region. It's actually that it's got the potential to connect us seamlessly with the rest of the country and with North America and significant portions of Latin America as well. In fact, we've already seen some informal chatter in the technology community about how the Flair is providing us with quote unquote the nerd bird, connecting high technology ecosystems with Waterloo region for the first time in a very cost effective way, right? So that's an exciting development, almost an accidental opportunity that we've got here. And of course, the execution is it's all about execution. You know, we need to deliver on the vision, and part of what this discussion is all about.
I believe Mr. Lochner would like to weigh in as well.
Yeah, thanks. Just to add to what Mr. Regier said, and to Councillor Jowett's point, the breadth and strength of the region. I mean, that's just one example. The airport, like what Grayson said, we're a municipal superpower. And you can't build world class, as council knows, by just building pieces of the services. So we're trying to move all of our services to world class, which is tough in a fiscally restrained environment. So that's where innovation comes in. That's where partnerships come in. And it's certainly not the region doing it alone. Nobody can become world class by themselves. So really appreciate all the partnerships that are growing, and the innovation that staff is staff is moving forward with, and your point is very well taken, Councillor Jowett.
Thank you. Is that all, Councillor Jowett? Thank you very much. Councillor Shantz, please go ahead.
Thank you. Two observations. The first one is, and I think this sort of came throughout the presentation, was the importance of partnerships with other organizations and around the region, and how we connect people. I think that's really key. And in the line of connection, something that I missed, and it may have been in there, but we talked about information, regional information, and making sure that that's all there. But I don't think I heard anything about sort of broadband, connecting making sure that everyone has access to technology. So that might be a nuance that you want to put, or maybe I just missed it. But, great presentation, thank you.
Mr. Lochner is happy to weigh in, Councillor Shantz.
Thanks through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Shantz, yes, well said. We know from an economic development perspective, we know from a healthcare perspective, we know from a whole bunch of perspectives that broadband, not only in the rural areas, but sometimes even in our urban centers, is a question. I know that Councillor Jowett has talked about this, and I think it's intended to be raised at economic development. And speaking of innovation, Mr. Yancey actually has been talking about opportunities potentially for broadband and our participation in that. So I don't want to steal Terry's thunder. I'm not sure if he wants to say anything today or if he'd rather bring that back at a future council meeting. This is definitely a warm up to that conversation.
Mr. Yancey, you look ready to respond.
Yeah, briefly, and thank you, Bruce, and through you, Madam Chair. It is an obvious, council, as you know, has made a significant investment through SWIFT that's realized benefits in the rural townships. But yeah, accessibility for all and connectedness for all, we've learned under COVID, is more important than ever. So we're looking at ways that Region IT can help facilitate, again, increasing partnerships with partners like Rogers, to looking to increase that as much as we can. And as you've noted, especially in rural areas. But as Bruce noted, sometimes that connectivity is both in an urban area and then to communities that are underprivileged and don't have access to the broadband that all of us might have, or even the cellular service. So yeah, we're looking for those kinds of things as well, and what we can do in IT, and I think especially through economic development, to make that happen. And we can bring back more information as we gather that and make more plans.
And I know, Councillor Shantz, you and I were in Ottawa for the disappointing result of Smart Cities competition, but I know that Grayson, who's already been quoted, and I think we'll all quote him from now on, as us being the region being a superpower in the municipal sector. I really love that. But connectivity was a huge theme throughout that whole initiative too. Councillor Ravanovich.
Thanks very much, Chair Redmond, and I too want to compliment Connie and staff on a really inspiring presentation today about some of the great things that we're doing and some of the amazing opportunities that exist. I really like the focus on partnership and collaboration. And in fact, when we think of some of the particularly successful regions across the world, in fact, they are partnerships as well of communities much like us, with our 3 urban centers and our 4 townships, that really add to the richness and the quality of life and the opportunity that exists in this region. I think of places like the Greater Vancouver Regional District and all of the communities that make up that area, from Vancouver to West Van to North Van and others. I think of Silver Valley and San Jose and Palo Alto and Cupertino and so on. I think of the Boston area, that's not only Boston but Cambridge and Brookline and others, and even the regional government, the Diputació de Barcelona, which Barcelona's the main brand, but it's a number of communities that have come together and created these strong regional districts. And regional districts actually are something that's a more common thing in Europe than it is here. But I think it's something that we can really build on and help build our brand as a strong regional family of governments in terms of the region and the local municipalities and our other partners that have helped us become the success that we are on the western end of the Toronto Waterloo Innovation Corridor. So well done, team.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I just wanted to make a comment and maybe just a couple of questions around connectivity and communication with our community. Like probably most of us on this call, I'm very excited to see this vision and the ability to really pick out some of the things and the key themes that we need to do in all of our decision making in order to continue to drive forward towards this world-class city. The one thing that I know in community discussions is the connection between all these pieces tends not to be talked about. It's a one-off issue that we hear at our council chambers. And I'll give you an example, and that's, I'm really talking about trying to draw the golden thread amongst all these things. Keeping the countryside line is a high value goal for all of our region residents. And what I find at the council tables for planning and development is that they don't understand then why we need to build up rather than out. And these are kind of those difficult community discussions when people don't like the new development in their own backyards, and they come to oppose the height, the breadth, the density of either a commercial establishment or a residential area. So my question would be, what changes do we need to do in our communication and our key messages towards some of the changes that we're seeing in, building out the transportation system, having to make some changes in order to accommodate the LRT second phase to Cambridge? What do we need to do to educate our public on why you need more dense residential area, and that with small pieces of land left, whether it's a greenfield or a brownfield development, why those developments need to go up to accommodate the density in order to go forward? So that's really what I'm looking for, is how do we now teach our public about where we're going and why we need to do things the way we're doing to achieve this incredible vision.
Sounds like a Connie question to me. Connie, is it a Connie question?
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you. I absolutely love it when communications and communication strategies are the focus of a discussion. I think that there's, a need for us as a community and not just the region, but to speak more clearly about the why. The why of the kind of community we're building in the future, and then to help people understand that if this is our why and this is the vision of where we want to live, there are a number of things that we all collectively have to do to get there. And if I think about the strategic imperatives and some of the language that was built into the strategic plan, things like, a focus on climate action, things like a focus on equity, things like balancing urban and rural. Those are all different components that our community needs to understand, because they're foundational to building the kind of community that we all want to live in the future. And I think I don't want to commit anybody to this, but I think that would be a great challenge for our municipal communicators group, with representatives from all of the local municipalities, to look at how do we engage our community in the why of the kind of future that we want to live in? And then what are those different educational pieces that people might need to understand the types of difficult decisions that we're going to have to make in the coming years to be able to build the kind of community that we all live in.
Councillor McGarry, any further comments or questions?
No, I think you've got it right, and that's what we need to do, is to build those partners in the communication piece, and I'm happy to work with you and other communicators on it. Thank you.
And Councillor McGarry, it's lovely to see you back. We certainly embrace the participation of Mike Mann. He was a great representative of Cambridge Area Municipal Council, but it's great to have you back. Councillor Foxton, I saw your hand up and then it went down. Did you want to make a comment or do you have a question?
A few things. Number one is connectivity and the broadband. Again, as Councillor Shant said, she's absolutely correct. And bring it to the rurals. We all know that's essential, but you know what else is essential? Upgrading the city's intercourse in broadband. A lot of times the providers think, oh, we've already provided it there, they can manage, and then they just shove more and more customers on the pole, weakening the source. So we've got to remember that we've got to think about the cities as well. And to do with the countryside line, sorry guys, I'm going to get on my soapbox, but countryside line and protecting farmland is essential. But we can't let it be gobbled up by aggregate. And we have to fight harder to say, if there's 43 pits open in North Dumfries, number 44 doesn't open until one of the 43 shut down, so that we do truly protect the countryside. And I am fighting that fight, guys. And I know you're backing me in a lot of ways, but that's essential because in my opinion, we're not going to eat 1 ounce of gravel, but we do need our farmland. And when the lady came to the rope meeting the other day and counted the number of farms, and I stopped and asked her, were they actual farms or was it also aggregate? And we do have to make that distinction because the province does not. Sorry for my high horse.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I had a little bit of a delay getting hooked up this morning, but I think we got everything under control. Just to Councillor Foxton's comments, I certainly agree, but I also get a little worried about the amount of development taking place in settlement areas as well. New subdivisions popping up all over the township, so I think you have to find that balance. But there's no question. All my years involved, I think the top priority, even through amalgamation discussions, was making sure we took care of the farmland and the county line. And I think that's really important. That's exactly what makes our region more distinct than anyone else in Ontario, in fact, in Canada, because we have a well-balanced assets in the country and in the urban areas. And I think one of the things we can pride ourselves in, you could be 15 minutes from the country, basically anywhere in an urban area. And a lot of municipalities can't say that. So, and congratulations.
Did Jeff freeze for everybody?
Michelle, showing the whole world our big picture. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rentz. Councillor Foxton.
Sorry, just an add-on. So there's a lot of farms out in North Dumfries, and the farmers getting older, wanting to subdivide, take their house and live the last of their years on their country home, but sell the land to existing farmers. Based on the countryside line, there's a clause, and I did check because I talked to you about this, regional chair, and you said it's provincial regulation, and I found out it's not. It's in the countryside line that a farmer can't live in their home and sell the rest of their land to other farmers. I had two older couples in their 80s and 90s, and they said, my neighbor's a farmer, wants to buy my land because they say a viable farm has to be about 100 acres now, something like that. And so amalgamating the two farm lands would allow that for the one farmer. But it means they have to leave their country home because you're not allowed to divide it. You're not allowed to sever the home from the property. And so one of the other comments from the farming agency group is said, if you want housing, go to the country homes because they're all left empty. They're just left deserted because they can't sever from the farm, and so nobody wants to buy it with the farm. So that's another thing we have to look, and we have to clean that up. I have 5 or 6 elderly couples that are still on their farm, want to sever it and die in their homes, but they can't sever the farm and live in their homes. So that's something we can look at too as well, please.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. I see no further questions. I'd just like to add my voice to how inspiring I find this and energizing, you know, at a time when it feels like if we get through the pandemic, we've done well. Staff in the region have always been looking forward to beyond COVID-19 and to position us as we move forward to be, again, doing, I think Mr. Regier said, we sort of punch over our weight so that we will have much greater results than you might expect from a region of 630,000 people. So, Connie, back to you, or are we now going to shift to Mr. Dyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Council for all of the input and feedback. That was absolutely very helpful as we start building our plan for 2022. We have built in time for a break, so it's the Chair's prerogative, but we do have time for a quick break before we move into the financial component.
All right. I'm going to suggest we have a 5-minute break. People seem to be a much more humane chair than I usually am. And when we come back, Councillor Strickland will take the chair for the next portion of the meeting. So 5 minutes would have us at 10:15? 10:10?
10:15.
10:15, yeah, by my watch. So we'll see everybody back at 10:15, and Councillor Strickland will be in the chair.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Are we ready to call it back to order? Can you hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Perfect. Thanks. Let's wait for a couple others to come back online.
Sean, we're good to go at this end whenever you are, okay?
Okay, great. Well, let's carry on then. Thanks, Stevie. So the next part of the agenda is budget, context, guidelines, and timelines. We had a really good presentation of building a world-class community, but of course we have limitations on what we can and cannot do based on finances, and that's Craig's job to provide us with updates and what our budget is going to look like in 2022 and the challenges therein. And of course, at a subsequent meeting, we'll have to establish some priorities. So, Mr. Dyer, over to you.
Very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully everybody can hear me and see my slides.
That's an affirmative, Craig.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, I feel a bit like I have the unenviable task of speaking to council for a few minutes about the 2022 budget after the first part of the presentation. As I looked through the material that I'm going to talk about today, it occurred to me that maybe there was perhaps an introductory slide that perhaps was missing. And so I would just ask council, as we go through the discussion about the 2022 budget development, maybe keep a couple of things in mind. One is staff have been working on the 2022 budget for some time now. In fact, it was not long after the 2021 budget was approved that we started our planning and thinking about what not only 2022, but what 23, 24 would look like as well. So we're already deep into this process. The 2022 preliminary budgets are in the process of being assembled. There's a couple of specific items that we'll be looking for some input on after I go through the material. One would be, we're going to talk a little bit about budget principles. So getting some input, feedback from council on the principles would be helpful. We're going to run through a draft timeline for the 2022 budget. So some input on that as well. And then finally, some discussion about what council would see as a reasonable range to plan for. And the range would be in terms of tax and user rate impacts for the 2022 budget. One of the aspects of the 21 budget that we thought was extremely helpful was the clear direction and guidance that staff received from council last September following the workshop that that council had out at the airport, if you recall. And we received some very clear direction about expectations around tax and user rate increase. And that, certainly from my perspective, and I think a view largely shared by staff at the region, was instrumental in our work in September and October to the budget that we brought forward. So any input and feedback that you can give us with respect to a guideline would be greatly appreciated. And my presentation today is going to focus on a couple things. A very, very quick review of 2020, a very quick update on where things are at so far in 2021. And then I'm going to get right into the context and the timetable and what our early modeling is telling us about the 2022 budget. So from a 2021 budget perspective, again, trying to summarize a long process onto one slide. The guidelines that council provided were achieved. We had no water and wastewater rate increase. We had a very modest overall tax increase in the range of about 0.5%, 0% for regional services, and very few increases to our user fees and charges. And in that budget, we identified a number of strategic investments and allocated resources to those strategic investments. We achieved a long list of efficiencies and cost savings across all of the departments that allowed us to achieve that guideline that council had set for us. There were some adjustments to transit service levels. That being said, we were able to reduce discretionary expenditures in a number of different areas. We implemented some of the service outcomes from the KPMG service review and put a number of other measures into place in order to achieve the council guideline. What's happened since then, so that was third week of January when the 2020 budget was approved, and what's happened since then, and actually over a relatively short period of time through February and March, was a significant amount of federal and provincial funding announcements for 2021. And this carried over from what I've described as the extraordinary levels of financial support provided through the 2020 fiscal year. And that's continued into 2021. From an additional $16 million for transit through the Safe Restart Fund, $7 million in provincial COVID funding, another $6.5 million in the Social Services Relief Fund, a series of funding announcements, mainly through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care relating to public health, paramedic services, and long-term care, subject to the necessary legislation being approved, the doubling of the federal gas tax transfer, and approval for some COVID resilience projects and an airport project as well. So significant levels of funding support have been received so far in 2021. And that leads us to the very high level conclusion that the 2021 financials overall look reasonably good as we come towards the end of the second quarter. On the tax supported side, we have had a number of staff seconded to vaccine distribution since the start of the year, and we are anticipating a full recovery of those costs from the Ministry of Health. We also had a number of vacant staff positions that were put on hold as our recruitment efforts were focused on staffing up for vaccine distribution. So that's also produced some savings. And in addition to the federal and provincial funding, we would say overall that puts us in a very good position as we head into the second half of the year. If I was making a projection right now, I would say we're very likely to have a modest surplus, much along the lines of what we experienced in 2020. But we will provide more detail. I think it's at the August committee meeting, a mid-year update on progress against the plan and a mid-year financial update as well. On the user rate side, we looking overall in a balanced position, healthy on the water, more healthy on the water side than on the wastewater side, projecting another revenue shortfall, but with some savings to offset that. Overall, we think we'll be roughly in a neutral position overall with respect to the user rate budget. So I would say, halfway through what's been an extremely challenging year, overall in a pretty good position as we head into the third quarter. And that leads us to thinking then about what will the 2022 budget look like? What's the environment and the context? And I've tried to summarize that in a handful of bullet points here. And Mr. Chair, I won't go through all of them, but from an economic and political perspective, recovery, coming out of the COVID pandemic. What does the recovery look like over the next 6 months? We have, I think, some changing expectations with respect to service delivery in a variety of areas. We have, best described maybe as an uncertain political environment as we head into 2022, certainly a provincial and a municipal election next year, timing of the federal election unclear at this point. And the province and the federal governments, well, they are both experiencing unprecedented levels of deficits. I think it's pretty clear, at least right now, deficit reduction is not their priority. That's going to change at some point, I suspect, but we may be a little ways away from that. From an economic perspective, I'd say an always interesting but definitely challenging time. Inflation is increasing, construction costs are increasing, interest rates are increasing, fuel prices are increasing. The Canadian dollar is stronger than it has been for some time, which doesn't have a significant impact on the region. And then, of course, the ongoing pressure to minimize tax and user rate increases creates an interesting challenge as we look to bring forward a budget that invests in a number of strategic priorities for 2022 and beyond. And of course, we want to look at all this in the context of long-term financial sustainability. We have a long-term financial sustainability update report coming to Committee of the Whole for consideration on the 22nd. A number of pressures on the capital programs side, which I'll get into in a minute. Continuing our funding for asset renewal, for development charge exemptions. I can't, as you know, I can't go through a budget presentation without saying something about our debt levels that we're continue to watch very carefully. Manage. We know that our debt is higher than our AAA rated peers. Our reserves are lower than our AAA rated peers. We're managing that. We've managed it well. I think over the last several years, it continues to be a challenge moving forward. And so just a couple of those indicators, got a couple of graphs here just to show you. So this is Consumer Price Index. And you can see the rather dramatic increase through March and April, expecting that to continue through May. Levels of CPI that we haven't seen in, I think, more than a decade, maybe longer than that. But notably, part of what we're seeing right now is a reflection of what happened exactly a year ago. So if you look on this graph about how low the inflation was in April and May, part of what we're seeing right now is the comparison to those extremely low prices, to a certain extent, fuel related, as we went through the early stages of the pandemic in the spring of 2020. So I think it's expected that inflation is going to moderate. The question is, at what level will that moderation happen? From an unemployment rate, unemployment rate obviously peaked in the spring of 2020, has been coming down steadily since then. It occurred to me this morning that this graph is a little bit mislabeled. The Kitchener line is probably more accurately described as the Kitchener-Cambridge-Waterloo CMA, and not just the city of Kitchener. Notably, though, the unemployment rate, so you can see what's happened in our region since the spring of last year. For 4 or 5 months, we were higher. So we've been traditionally lower than Canada and Ontario. For 4 or 5 months, we were higher. Now we've come back lower and have been lower than the national and provincial rates since the early part of this year, latter part of 2020. So definitely going in the right direction. Cost of borrowing, Government of Canada bond yields are certainly higher than they were back in 2020, bumped up in the spring, have stayed relatively consistent since that point. And I would say still attractive from a historical perspective, so still relatively low. Where we are seeing a definite challenge budget-wise is the price of fuel. As you know, Mr. Chair, a budget is made up of hundreds and hundreds of estimates and projections. This one we definitely got wrong, at least over the first 6 months of this year. What you see here, and maybe the two main items to look at, this is unleaded fuel. The green line is the 2021 budget. The red line is the average price that we've been acquiring the fuel at. So we budgeted, it looks like about 94 cents. Our year-to-date average is about $1.05. So we're about 10 cents a liter lower on gasoline, and very similar levels on diesel. And of course, the majority of our fuel costs are in the diesel area. So we're going to have to look at making some type of adjustment. Fuel, the price of oil continues to rise. That's the blue line. Pretty steady increase since the beginning of this year. And at this point, no signs of letting up. So that'll be needing some adjustment next year, and we'll provide more information in our mid-year financial review. And so all that being said, as we look ahead to 2022, we have maybe not unusual. Every municipal budget has has pressures, has perhaps conflicting priorities. And just perhaps, a long list of priorities that we want to get at. And what we've tried here to do, without quantifying them, is just identifying where we see priority areas for investment, and other areas that are putting pressure on our budgets. So some of them relate to the strategic investments that we started this year in 2021. Technology, affordable housing, support for our Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities, supports for business through COVID. Those are all going to be priorities also as we head into 2022. Reinstating service, particularly with respect to Grand River Transit. I believe a staff report will be coming on June 22nd to discuss planned service level changes for September of this year. Infrastructure and the capital program continues to be a priority area, and also where we see significant pressure on future budgets. Anytime we put new infrastructure in place, we have to finance it, maintain it, operate it, renew it, and all that has to be built into our projection models. Climate action, again, and another staff report coming forward to the next cycle, looking at how we need to change our capital program ultimately in the future in order to achieve our climate action objectives. Debt servicing, I've already referred to. Discretionary RDC exemption will be in year 3 of our 3-year funding strategy. So we're close to getting that funded, which is great. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a number of capital plan updates, which I'll get to in just a second. Probably the slide with the most numbers on it. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'd like to just focus on the one in the bottom right-hand corner. Our modeling right now, taking into account again, a number of assumptions about growth, about inflation services, suggest 6% tax increase right now. So our challenge, of course, is going to be to bring in a budget that's consistent with whatever guideline council gives us. We're certainly expecting that we'll need to move off of that 6%. And the work has started to help us find ways in order to achieve the savings that we'll need in order to bring in a budget consistent with council's expectations. As I said earlier, our user rate budgets all came in at 0% from our rate impact in 2021. Our modeling for 2022 suggests the 2 to 3% range. So we'll be starting with those numbers and looking at different options to bring forward to council to consider. On the capital side, I think a fairly consistent message. Our capital program, I would say at a high level, is underfunded in some areas, probably over leveraged in others, and over leveraged does simply mean that the extent of the reliance on debt and long-term financing is higher than we think it should be. We also have a number of changes that we need to bring forward and consider in the 2022 budget, which we believe is going to lead us to the need to look at the timing and the scope, and maybe what I should have in here really is the prioritization of certain projects as we head into 2022, and staff will be working on that over the course of the summer. And some of the changes to the capital plan, we have regional costs associated with the King Victoria Transit Hub to add, potentially a capital contribution to the Breslau GO station, the acceleration of the airport master plan, our cost estimates for the Waterloo Region housing master plan are higher at this point than they were when we did the budget last year. So we have some cost inflation to include in our budget. And overall cost pressures, as I said before, the capital construction costs are increasing, the cost of borrowing is increasing, and to the extent that we need to acquire land, I can say particularly for a road expansion project, for example, the cost of land is increasing as well. So we have a fairly significant exercise to go through and adjust the cost of various projects to reflect the current reality. And every time we do that, of course, it does mean that we potentially need to issue more debt, which produces more debt servicing costs. And importantly, a number of the projects that are impacted are growth related, and the higher costs will need to be reflected in the future development charge rate calculations. So we'll be looking over the next 6 months about when we think an appropriate time is to undertake a new background study and update our development charge rates. And this is kind of what we would like to avoid. And really what to look at is on the left-hand side, this is projected debt issuance, both historically over the last 5 years and looking ahead. And what we would like to do is find a way to avoid that significant increase in debt issuance over the next 5 years by adjusting the timing of certain projects so that we can level it out and not risk having our debt outstanding go as high as currently projected. So a bunch of work staff needs to do on that, and we'll be doing that over the course of summer and into the early fall. My slides are almost done, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on principles that we've put together and discussed at a staff level. The challenge, of course, and this is the balancing act that council has to undertake each year through the budget, because we want a budget that will meet our strategic plan objectives, accomplish what we want to accomplish, but also keep us on a good path towards long-term financial sustainability. So we're going to be looking at adjusting the scope and timing of projects. We've already had an initial discussion on some of the key areas: water, wastewater, transportation, transit. We'll be looking at all the areas. Of course, we'll be looking to where we can adjust the timing of projects so that we minimize the amount of growth-related debt that we're also issuing. And of course, we're already on a path to minimize the use of debt to finance our asset renewal projects. So our challenge is to bring forward projects that help us achieve our long-term, short and long-term objectives, but do it in such a way that we're maintaining long-term financial sustainability. And so overall, in terms of the development of the plan and the various principles that we've put together, from a staff perspective, we would say that 2021 was a highly successful budget process. We'd like to build on that. I think on the momentum that we created through that process, everything that we do, we should be able to point back to the strategic plan and one or more of the focus areas. We have a number of critical elements that we need to invest in. Innovation and technology being one, employee well-being being another. We're going to look to avoid service reductions. We're going to look to provide, to find efficiencies, to consolidate services where we can. And we always will be mindful about how our tax rates and our user fees and charges impact the residents and businesses of this community. And again, with my mantra with respect to long-term financial sustainability, making sure we're making good long-term discussions as we approve each budget. From a timeline perspective, staff would recommend a timeline that would see 2022 budget approval happen in December of 2021. This is similar to what we did, I'm going to say not last year, but the couple of years. We were January for the 2021 budget, but we had December approvals for the previous years. We'd like to get back on that schedule and have a budget approved in December. That would mean bringing, so two key pieces to that from a council perspective. We'd like to bring a budget guideline report forward on June the 30th. And our first presentation to budget committee would be sometime in mid to late October. And then we'd have a couple of budget committee meetings in November and then budget approval in December. So again, Mr. Chair, the discussion points, input that we're looking for on the principles, on the timeline, on a range of potential property tax and user rate increases, or anything else that you've heard in the presentation today. Again, I think that there's going to be a need for balancing between strategic priorities, long-term financial sustainability, reasonable tax and user rate increases, and looking where we can at prioritizing.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. Before I open it up to questions, and there are several.
I'm sharing my.
Yeah. I think in terms of the last bullet there about potential tax increases, I think, committee members can signal what they would like, but I wouldn't suggest, this is a lot to take in one day. So it's pretty hard for us to make a decision on what kind of targeted tax increase we want to look at. I think you could signal that when we have the conversation. I also understand that there's a subsequent report that will come back, and I would suggest that would be for information with some potential options, and then we can have the debate and then make a decision as a group on what kind of range we want to target. So I don't think we want to get into a debate today around what's the targeted increase. And before I also turn it over, Craig, just a couple of high-level questions. One is, 6% is the projected tax increase. What does that mean for the average regional taxpayer? You can get back to us on that. I'm
not sure I can do all that math in my head, but I suspect it's in the range of $100.
Okay. And then also what does a 1% increase in tax levy equal in terms of additional revenue for the region?
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be just right around $6 million. All
right. So that's up, like last time was like 5.45 or something?
I think it was I'm going to say it was in about the $5.8 million range, but we'll get a calculation based on our assumed level of assessment growth, and we can get that number to you.
And that was my final question. I didn't, unless I missed it, see a slide on assessment growth. So the 6%, is that net of assessment growth, or assessment growth needs to come off of that still?
No, that's a net number. So and that would be for the regions, in other words, the non-police portion of the tax bill. We've assumed 1.3% assessment growth in that calculation.
Okay. Thank you. All right, let's turn it over to committee. Councillor Clark.
And that was so much information, and I do appreciate that we're really not going to be discussing or debating it today. Just one question, and I'm sure the other councillors will have others that I share. I was on a call this morning before this meeting with somebody from Infrastructure Ontario, and she said that the cost of steel, lumber, concrete, among other things, have all increased in the double digits, sometimes 30 and 40%. I'm wondering where that increase is reflected or anticipated in the numbers that you presented. Are we seeing any of that in the 6%, or is that all on the capital side, wrapped in with them maybe deferring some projects?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I would say probably the latter. We'll see some of this impact our operating budget, but more significantly, we're likely to see it on the capital side. So the first part of our exercise with respect to the capital plan is going to be to go through the various projects that we have in our forecast and make adjustments for exactly the items that you just referenced, as well as making adjustments for timing or scope or for whatever other new information we might have received about a project. So we'll have to take that revised, updated list of projects, look at it corporately, and figure out what an appropriate how would I put it? How do I best describe it? An appropriate plan or strategy looks like about when those projects can and should be built. So we got to look at the need. We've got to look at the existing infrastructure that's in place. If it's growth related, when does that infrastructure need to be put into place? Update the capital costs, and then update our financing strategy as well. So where we might see it is more so out in the future years of the operating budget forecast. It'll have a little bit of impact as we head into 2022, but I would say I'm going to speculate here a little bit. I think for the most part, it's going to impact the cost of projects in the capital program, which we'll see in debt servicing costs 2, 3, 4, and 5 years out.
Just we have about $28 million we're planning on spending the next couple of years on affordable housing, and I don't think those are projects we can defer. We have the money we need to spend it, but we'll see a lot less impact if all of a sudden we're getting 60% or 70% of the build out of that same amount of money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, Craig, for the excellent slides and for the team's work on this, and probably all the regions' work on this. So thank you very much for that. Infinite number of ways to spend money, very few ways to bring in money. And the one that comes to mind is transit funding and the recovery of transit. And as I think through coming priorities, and I'm sure this is a staff priority already. However, with climate change, our excellent GRT system with electric buses is just going to get excellenter. But, we'll have an opportunity to raise money and build ridership, which are two different levers there. I just want to confirm, is that one of our best opportunities to bring in new revenue, or are there others that or council's perhaps not thinking of?
So through you, Mr. Chair, if I understand the question, are you referring to the potential for additional funding from the federal government?
No, of building our own revenue, of us as a corporation of the Region of Waterloo. We have certainly user tax, tax-based user fees, but if we want to build in revenue, that's really the only one I can really think of that's sort of available to us, really, other than, DCs and that, but are there other items?
I think I understand the question now. And yes, so transit revenues historically have been the single largest source of user fee revenue for the region. Also the most impacted by COVID. So just give you round numbers, in 2020, our transit fare revenue budget was over $40 million. Our actual in 2020 was probably about $20 million. So that's one of the key assumptions that we need to make as we head into 2022 is what is the extent to which we can assume transit fare revenues for 2022, and how much of the Safe Restart funding do we need to use? I think I think the other important decision relating to transit is I think it's been 2 years now. So there was no transit fare increase in 2020 or in 2021. So that will be a decision point for council as part of the 2022 budget as to whether there'll be any adjustment to transit fares. The other thing we'll be doing, obviously, I think at a staff level, is looking at all the different sources of revenue that we do have, looking at making adjustments where appropriate, and perhaps examining opportunities to receive revenue that we haven't looked at before. So that'll be part of our internal review process over the next few months.
Thank you very much. And just so it's clear to Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Zink that I think council here also views ridership as a key one, independent of revenue as well. So that's just not to think I'm just in it for the money. I'm also in it for the ridership. But thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Councillor Jaworski. I have Councillor Shantz next. Is that correct?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Sandy.
Thanks. Good presentation, Craig. You're always you have a great way of sort of bringing things into an understandable picture. My question's sort of been alluded to and answered. It's a little bit along the lines of the end of Councillor Clark's. So we're spending a lot of money when we're in a time of transition, and I'm thinking of affordable housing, where we're adding programs, infrastructure to support a certain group, but we're in a transition. So we've sort of got two systems working simultaneously. Is there any way in the model, or does the model account for the benefits that we hope to see in the future because of the work we're doing now? And you talked about DCs, but I just wondered if there's anything in the modeling that can show us financial benefits down the road because of some of these systems we're putting in place now.
Yes. So through you, Mr. Chair, it's a challenging question to answer. I think so. I can try it in a couple of different ways. The first way would be if we think about some of the work that we're doing in housing as an example, the revitalization, the rehabilitation of older housing units with newer, up-to-date, more energy efficient units, in theory, should give us operating cost savings in the future. So we try in our modeling wherever possible, at least at a high level, to say that as capital investments are undertaken, what is the impact on the operating side? And in some cases, it's higher costs in terms of more units to fund, more square footage to look after and heat and maintain and renew. In other cases, it's savings in some of those similar categories. So I would say we do that at a relatively high level and with the most significant projects. Another good example is the Northfield Transit Maintenance and Operations Facility has a significant impact on the budget in 2022. So it's slated to become operational mid-year. And it has a significant impact from an operational perspective. It's a huge facility. It needs to be maintained, heated, and staffed. And so all of that is built into our current estimate right now. And our next steps will be to put the budgets together at a very detailed level, which is either going to validate the estimates in the model or require us to update them further.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shantz. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks, Chair Strickland. And Craig, I refer you to page 35, the chart that speaks volumes. I mean, if there's a picture that's worth 1,000 words, I think this might be it. So when I look at this, I'm wondering about the timing of impacts of different things. Like, and I don't know if I can directly quote you, but you discussed the fact that the deficit reduction is not a priority with most levels of government currently, but I imagine it will be. So I guess we have to kind of keep an eye on, what the intent is there. But the thing I'm also curious about is this hyper inflated housing market and the impact on our taxpayers, like fatigue. By way of, I know that Elizabeth talked about how much. I mean, just food has gone up 30%. The cost of living, taxes, fuel. We've spoken to all of these things, and we know that post-COVID, we're going to see our homeless challenges probably become even more stressed. So, I'm not debating the 6%. I certainly don't want to do that now, and I know that's not what this exercise is about. But it's the timing. I guess I'm more concerned about. These housing prices are going to could cause people to walk away, and if inflation continues, I know we try to kind of manage that. So that's a lot of jumbling concept there. I'm just wondering how are you going to keep an eye on all of these different things that are going to impact timing perspective?
Well, it's through you, Mr. Chair, a difficult question to answer. So, but maybe I can try it this way. The balance that I referred to earlier, the balance I think that all municipal councils face every time they look at a budget is how do we achieve our strategic plan objectives? How do we provide the services that the community is asking for and wants and needs? And how do we do it in a way that it remains, I'll just loosely use the term affordable. And I know affordability will mean, different things to different people. But it's those three conflicting forces, for lack of a better term, that we have to deal with every time we put a budget together. And if you'll allow me to rant for just a moment, in the world-class document that accompanied the material today that Connie and Rod and I put together, we point out in that document the extreme challenge facing municipalities, especially municipalities in Ontario, where a significant portion of our budget is funded by the property tax to fund programs that serve a province-wide social equity income redistribution purpose. And that just adds on to the already significant challenge of looking after the majority of publicly owned infrastructure with almost no revenue sources, right? Because we have property taxes and user rates, and that's it. You layer on the funding of income redistribution related services makes the challenge in Ontario particularly difficult. And I know this is not answering your question, but I guess the point is staff will continue to bring forward what we hope is the right level of information about priorities, about affordability, about how our property taxes and user rates compare to other municipalities, to help you in your decision making when it comes to approving a 2022 budget.
Fair enough. Thanks, Craig. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Helen. Councillor Galloway?
Sure. That last point is a really important one that Craig just made, and one that I've mentioned on a number of occasions over the years in terms of the various social programs and income redistribution programs for which we do a good job as service managers, but the continual kind of creep into property taxes to support those programs. All great programs, all quite necessary, but we all know that property taxes is a very regressive form of taxation, and we have almost no access to consumption and income taxes. But anyways, my question, and forgive me if I missed this, Craig, when you talk about the potential, I know there's a lot of work to be done with the 6% yet, but does that include the transit expansions that were deferred from 2020 or from 2021 to 2022? So those transit expansions, we approved them, we deferred them to the next budget, 2022. So I'm assuming that they're baked in.
Good question. I'm just thinking back to the model now. At a minimum, I know that we have accounted for the reinstatement of service that was reduced last year, and then I believe we have a provision for service expansion. I can't remember now if it's GRT specific or a general provision starting in 2022 and into 2023. So I can go back and check the details, but we certainly are planning for additional transit service above what we have in place right now in the 2022 budget. And as I said earlier, a staff report is coming on June 22nd, which will recommend the reinstatement of some of that service in September of this year.
That's maybe not what I'm referring to, though, Craig. I know that we've reduced service because of the pandemic and we need to reinstate that, but we had certain, particularly I-Express routes expansions for the 2021 budget, which we for the 2020 budget, which we early on decided that we could not afford to implement because of COVID budgetary problems. And there wasn't a discussion and a decision, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but staff were wanting to cancel those particular those expansions. And I think a few others argued that we shouldn't cancel them, we should just defer them so that a subsequent decision would not have to be made, although everything comes up in a new budget. So it would be kind of my expectation that those transit expansions that we deferred to this year, to the coming year, would be included, but maybe you could check that for me. And then the other question is, are there any number of issue papers that we could anticipate over and above the 6%? Or are there is there an allowance for issue papers in the 6%?
Yep. So through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it's the latter. There's an allowance included in the 6%. For example, the continued implementation of the paramedic services master plan, based on the forecast that was approved as part of the plan, that is contemplated for mid-year implementation in 2022 and would be included in 2022 estimate and then annualized into future years. So yes, we have a provision for what we've referred to in the past as issue papers, and that's something that we'll be considering as we go through our internal budget reviews this summer.
Do you have any kind of a quantification of that? Is it 1 of the 6% or 1.5 or half of the 0.5%, or if you know?
I don't know offhand, but I can find out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Galloway. I see no further questions. So those some good questions there on further clarification as we seek to end the budget and the implications. And, you know, it's not unusual for us to have a draft tax increase, you know, that's fairly high, 5 or 6%. We're going to have to do some work to determine where we feel we want to have that tax increase at, and have to find a time in which we can have that kind of broader level discussion to determine a range that we would like to see as a group. So what I would suggest is that, you know, maybe Chair Redmond, myself, Vice Chair Jowett, and Mr. Dyer figure out how we can have that discussion based on a report, and then have the debate and set a target. Because I do agree with staff that it's really important for us to give them a target, and from there we can add or subtract or do whatever we need to do to reflect what we think you know, is the best interest of the community. So if you're in agreement with that, I think that'd be the best path forward. And the next time we come together, we'll have that fulsome debate and discussion. Okay, I see thumbs up. So I guess I'll just carry on, Karen, and with the agenda, and then we'll get into close, and then we'll turn the chair back to you. So any other business before committee of the whole? Seeing none. Next meeting. When is that? Next week? 22nd? I think so. All right, and then a motion to go into closed session. Could I have a moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Clark? All those. Tom, do you have your hand up for something? Okay, go ahead, Tom, before we have the vote on.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just curious whether or when will the police numbers get folded into the even broader discussion?
Greg?
Through Mr. Chair, at this point, we haven't received anything specific from the police with respect to their 2022 budget. I think we'll look to have those conversations with them over the summer as budget development continues. And as soon as we have something we can include in our modeling, we'll bring it forward, obviously being mindful of and respectful of the Police Services Board process as well.
Sean, Mr. Lochner has indicated he'd like to speak to this too.
Okay, Bruce?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to what Craig said, the discussions, I'll be reaching out to the chief, and obviously, as Craig said, the board needs to weigh in, but I think it would be nice as we look at building a world-class community, and the team has presented today, and then obviously budgets supporting the most important priorities of the community. It would be helpful if we collaborate more, I would say, in terms of process and approach. So that would be part of the discussion over the summer as well. I think we want to avoid some of the challenges we faced in the past. So.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so all those in favor of going into close, please use your signal, your little green check. If you're against, use the red one. All right, so that's carried. We're going to go into close. Karen, you want to take a couple-minute break while we get people on and off the call, and we'll stay on the line?
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, we should probably take a couple-minute break because we're going to have to stop the live stream.